Good afternoon. This is Dyke Hendrickson, and this is the podcast Life Along the Merrimack. We meet every Tuesday and we repeat it from time to time, and we talk about the health and history of the Merrimack River. And this is 96.3 FM and local Channel 9 cablecast. And so we try to bring attention to the river and to the people who are trying to improve it. If you're watching, the slide we have in front of us is two people who have helped bring the Merrimack very much. That's State Representative Jim Kelcours of Amesbury in the stern, and State Senator Diana DiZoglio from the Methuen area. She's in the bow. They and others took a long trip down the river about 2 years ago. They call themselves the Voyagers, and they did it partly to see how clean or dirty the river was, and partly to draw attention to the fact the river does need to be cleaner. The river is 117 miles long. It starts in Franklin, New Hampshire, and they did about 30 miles per day. They were very tired at the end of it, I can tell you. It is downriver, but nevertheless, there's white water, there's paddling. And I think they met with the media and with local officials every afternoon of the 4 afternoons, and they talked about what they had seen. Now, this week in mid-July is an important week for the Merrimack River. It has been raining on and off for about 2 weeks, and there have been numerous CSOs that have been put into the river. Now, a CSO is a combined sewage overcharge or discharge. And so that happens when it gets very rainy. The pipes from the rainwater go into the sewage treatment plant. And if you're in a drought or not much rain, that's fine. Then the sewage treatment plant can get rid of the water and everything's fine. But when you get so much rain, the water gets into the sewage treatment plant, and it has to let everything go. There's no room for everything. So it's a combined sewage overflow, CSO. And this is a week, incidentally, that there have been several here on the Merrimack River. And I should mention that the communities that are having these CSOs include Lowell and Lawrence, Haverhill, Nashua, and Manchester, New Hampshire. Now, this is a bad thing, of course. CSOs are bad. They let pollution and fecal matter and bad bacteria into the river. On the other hand, the river is a large, fast-flowing river. So this does not mean disaster, but it does mean, and it has meant in recent years, that legislators and leaders have to be more aware of it, and they have to take steps to improve it. Now, I mention this because Governor Baker recently got several $billions for infrastructure improvements, and that came out of COVID money. And the word is that he's trying to put some of this money towards CSOs, and by that it would mean, well, maybe he'll give $10 million to Lawrence. Maybe he'll give $15 million to Lowell so that they can improve their sewage treatment plants. So this is an important moment because there has been the CSOs, and there are boaters on the Merrimack River who have seen it. Now, the curious thing is, for those of us in Newburyport, and if you're listening to this, you're in Newburyport, we're at the end of the line. Our sewage treatment plant is good. We don't have CSOs, but those plants do release sewage when they become too full with rainwater and sewage. So after several days, it is not good of rain. And we know this because we're at a time when some officials are starting to say, hey, we had a CSO up in Lawrence. In 2 days, you're probably going to get some real bad sewage. Or Lowell will say the same thing. We're finally getting to a point where the sewage treatment plant operators upriver will talk about it. Now, it's not their fault. In fact, I've been at seminars and I've listened to the sewage treatment plants folks, especially up in Lowell. They know their stuff and they want to do right. But these plants were designed 30 or 40 years ago, and we've got to keep the rainwater separate from the sewage. And they're trying to make those improvements. And I would mention another thing we'll talk about it in a moment, but there is federal money for improving sewage treatment plants. It's low interest loans, about 1.5%. Congresswoman Laurie Trahan is one of those trying to get the money. Congressman Seth Moulton from the North Shore is trying to get some of that money. And during the Trump administration, no money was available. We won't go into the specifics, but they didn't do it. And so now I think some of these communities know that they have to improve, and it would be a beautiful thing if Governor Baker is able to take some money out of that. I think it's several $billion that he's getting federal and send it along to the Merrimack River. Because at the end of the day, we can pick up, plastic and bottles and that stuff and drag bicycles out of the river, as is often done. But we really need the sewage treatment plants upriver to improve. And they know that. And the Environmental Protection Agency knows that. And it's just that those communities need more money. And hopefully with this federal money that is on Governor Baker's desk right now, some of it will be coming in this direction. So I'm happy about that. Another thing I'm happy about is I have discovered a new hero of the Merrimack River area, and her name is Annie H. Brown. She's no longer with us, but I've been studying Plum Island lately because my next book is going to be about Plum Island, tentatively titled Plum Island, a Vulnerable Gem. What would happen way back in 1938 or 39 or so, there were a lot of birders, people who love birds as we have them now, going to Plum Island, even then, late 30s. And Annie H. Brown of Stoneham, a wealthy woman, and decided that she loved birding and she wanted to do something for the birding world. So she got her lawyers together and she gave hundreds of acres to the Maine Audubon Society and also to other groups, birding groups. And with several thousand acres aggregated through the goodwill of Annie H. Brown, the birders and Audubon Society and others were able to create a federal wildlife preserve. Now that's what we have now, a federal wildlife preserve, but it wasn't always like that. Earlier than that, builders wanted to go out there and, put 200 cabins out off at the south end of Plum Island. But it was the courage and goodwill of Annie H. Brown and others who she gave the land. Audubon Society came in, they took it over, they met with the feds. So starting in about 1942, we have some good land upon which you can go birding, but the first priority is birds and nature, not building houses. Now, there were houses out there in 1942 that we're talking about, but federal officials made deals with the homeowners and said, basically, you can stay in here as long as your last heir is living and wants to. And then after that, we will pay for the value of the house and we will take it over. So that's what actually happened. There are no more houses out on Plum Island and Grape Island that used to exist there, in large part because the federal government, the Federal Wildlife Preserve people, are moving forth to keep that as a natural resource. And it's interesting, sometimes you can get frustrated at going to the refuge. Now, this is on Plum Island at the south end. In other words, you turn right. when you get off the bridge, because some people have dogs they want to run. Some people have vehicles they want to put on the sand. But this cannot be done as long as birds are the priority. And I think many of us have seen the stories of the plovers who they're trying to mate, and so for several months, June, July, frequently, the lot number 1 and others is not open because they want to leave that so plovers can go there. But this is one thing that's happening, and many things happening because of legislation. But I do say Annie H. Brown, when she gave a good amount of land to the feds and to the Audubon Society, did a wonderful thing. So in my book about Plum Island, I'm going to have more about Annie H. Brown, why she did it, what her motives were. So I'm excited about that. And I also wanted to talk about some other people here on the North Shore that have been very helpful in keeping a clean Merrimack River. The two folks you're looking at, and if you don't have television, if you're listening, Jim Kelcourse is in the rear or the stern of this kayak. He's a state rep from Amesbury. In the bow is Senator DeZoglio from Methuen, although she represents about 8 communities, and she is in the bow. So they're coming down river 2 years ago, and that was a fun trip for them. Here you have one of my heroes. This is a photo of Ellen Swallow Richards. And she was the first woman graduate of MIT in 1883. She actually had enough credits to get a graduate degree, but MIT did not give graduate degrees to women. But she kept moving ahead and was very valuable to those of us on the North Shore. In the 1880s and early 1890s, there were numerous outbreaks of typhoid, and young people died, and many got sick. A lot of them were in Lawrence. And people found that even though Lawrence had a system for cleaning the water, which came from the Merrimack River, it wasn't a very good system. So a state board was convened, and Ellen Swallow Richards was put on that state board. Now, her maiden name was Ellen Swallow, which is a good surname to have if you're going into the field of drinking water. But then she married Professor Richards of MIT, and she became Ellen Swallow Richards. Anyway, she was one of about 6 or 7 on this panel. She was one who saw discrepancies and weaknesses in the way the science was being conducted, how the water was being treated. She came up with a better plan. And so Ellen Swallow Richards and others developed a better scientific approach to drinking water. And so it worked very successfully. Typhoid left the scene, and it was what she did was so valued that it went to Lawrence, it went to Nashua, and it went to communities around the country. She was on a team that really were revolutionary in improving drinking water. She was also very versatile. She and about a dozen other women in Cambridge started an organization today known as the American Association of University Women. It's many thousands of women in that. And she also is called the mother of home economics. During 1890, 20th century open, she would get together with folks and she would create free lunches for lower income people in Cambridge. And, we still do this today, but she was doing it more than 100 years ago. So free lunches, she went into kitchens of homes and gave them advice on cleaning the kitchen, having balanced meals, buying nutritious food. So some of these things we know about now, but not everybody knew at the time. So she was a pioneer in drinking water, in home economics, and in women's organizations moving forward with college degrees. Another New England icon was Senator Edmund Muskie. If you're listening, we're looking at a photo of Muskie. He sponsored the Maine. Ed Muskie's from Maine, and he sponsored the Clean Water Act of 1972. This was very, very valuable. The word environmental movement is in our lexicon today, but before the early 70s, there really wasn't anything in terms of an environmental movement. Rachel Carson, in about 63, had written a book called Quiet Spring, but she was kind of poo-pooed. She was a woman, and 90% of the legislators were men. But when Ed Muskie came along and said, you know, we have to do more to clean our water and clean the air, it really meant something. He and others had seen something remarkable. In 1969, the Cuyahoga River in Ohio, and that's near Cleveland, caught fire. Now, this sounds strange, but it is true. And there were so many chemicals and so much sludge and bad stuff in the river, it caught fire. And no one could actually, you know, dispute it. It was on covers of Time magazine, of newspapers. And I think there was no way of explaining yourself out of this one. Something was really wrong. So Muskie was among those who moved forward and pushed for Clean Water Act of 1972. Here he is. He was unable to win the vice presidency with Hubert Humphrey in 1968. They two ran. And in 1972, he tried to get the Republican the Democratic nomination in a Republican year, but he did not win, did not get the nomination. But he was a tenacious advocate, and he put many hours in to develop legislation for clean water. And in 1972, the Clean Water Act was passed. Another person who is very valuable and whose work is affecting us now is Senator George Mitchell of Maine. Here's a photo of Mitchell. He is about 87 now. He's retired from the Senate, of course. But in 1987, President Ronald Reagan suddenly said, I don't want federal grants to go to the cities anymore. I'm not paying for them to build sewage treatment plants. So this is the fact they got grants, meaning they get the money, they don't have to pay much of it back, it's a gift. That had helped Lawrence and Lowell and Haverhill and every community really, but not just the Merrimack, is up in Maine, is in the Hudson River, the Mississippi. The Clean Water Act gave billions so rivers could get sewage treatment plants and clean up. But what Mitchell did is he said, all right, if you're getting rid of the grants, at least let us have low interest loans to improve our sewage treatment plants and upgrade the piping. So that somehow passed. And even today, we have low interest loans. 1.5% they're at now, as I understand it. And people like Lori Trahan and Seth Moulton, they're trying to get that money now. So there was very little money available during the Trump administration. The spigot was off, as the expression goes. But Mitchell started the low interest loans in 1987. They still exist today. Our congressional reps are looking for that money, and places like Haverhill, Lowell, Lawrence, Nashua, and other places in New Hampshire, Manchester included, are trying to get that low interest money now. So that's a big thing. He was important. Another key member of the cleaning of the Merrimack was Paul Tsongas. If you're listening on the radio, here's a photo of him. And of course, we're 96.3 FM Joppa radio and local cable channel 9 on the television. Tsongas was a great champion of Lowell, to be sure. And he also worked hard for the river. Here's a picture I love of Senator Tsongas with his wife, Nikki. Later, after his passing, she served in Congress as well for more than a decade, actually. Paul Tsongas died in 1997 at the age of 56. Here is his gravesite adjacent to the Merrimack River. So he did a lot of service for the river, a lot of service for Lowell, and what a beautiful resting spot he has. Here's a photo of the Whittier Bridge. This kind of sums up a lot of the beauty of the bridge, at least the bridge and the water down to our end, down towards Newburyport. And that was 292 million. Then it went to 300 million, and last I heard was 330 million. That seems like a lot, but now we seem to be in the age of trillions. So anyway, 330 million, there it is. We got a bridge. Here's an example of, what we're talking about. I recently wrote a book titled Merrimack, the Resilient River. And I called it resilient because it's really gone through a lot of phases where there were no controls on what factories could put in the river. And this is a disturbing shot of the Nashua River in the 1960s on the left. The Nashua is a tributary of the Merrimack, but the Merrimack River also could look like this. For those listening, this is a picture of the Nashua River. It looks orange. In fact, it is orange. Excuse me. The dye they used that day was probably orange, and they just put it in the river. Then you can see a photo from about 2012, the same general area. And this is a clean river, much has changed. So this is an example, if you ever wonder, well, what did it used to look like? This is a pretty good description of what it could look like when things were bad in the 60s and what it could look like and does look like in 2012. Here's something we don't like to see. This is not a sewage treatment plant outlet. It brings in water from the streets, but there's shopping carts and, there are volunteer groups that are trying to get rid of this debris and, bless them for it. Here's another element that we like to get rid of. Newburyport has improved its sewage treatment plant over the years, but it still is pipes dumping rainwater into the river. And this is near the boardwalk downtown Newburyport. And I think they'd like to get rid of that sooner rather than later. And here's the glorious Merrimack River, part of it in the Amesbury Haverhill area. It's a real asset on the North Shore. Here you can see how many developments are going in, some commercial, some residential. But as we've learned, the more forests we lose, the more fields that are disappear because of condos or apartment projects. That makes it, more bad stuff goes into the river, and some federal agencies are concerned that we're getting too much development, especially in southern New Hampshire. But that's a slow process. What we're thinking about now with all the rain are the CSOs. But so I guess my thought is sometimes the river is quite clean and glorious, and you can go out, on a jet ski and a canoe. Sometimes even if we're in a drought, you can go swimming. I've seen people swimming at Joppa and that type of thing. But if you've had 2 weeks of rain, as we have now, it is better to stay out of the river. Here's a beautiful shot, the Merrimack and Salisbury Bridge. And if you've been downtown at sunset, sites like this are very beautiful. As said, Diana DiZoglio, a state senator from Methuen, has been very valuable to this area. She's running for state auditor, I understand. And I hope to get her on my podcast so she can talk about that. But she's helped to start the Merrimack River Commission, and she's been a real leader in a cleaner river. Now, probably when you woke up this morning, you weren't expecting to see a smiling picture of former President Richard Nixon, but here it is. If you're listening, it's Richard Nixon on the left, Hubert Humphrey in the center, and Ed Muskie to the right. Nixon's name is actually on the legislation for the Environmental Protection Agency. As we said, there was so much political furor that a river could catch on fire that Nixon had a bunch of his team bring a lot of the smaller conservation agencies together, and they started the Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA. That's true. Nixon's name is on it. But 2 years later, when Ed Muskie was able to pass the Clean Water Act, President Nixon actually vetoed it. I mean, he became a rogue during Watergate, of course. From a few moments, he seemed to be on the side of the environmental folk, but he vetoed the Clean Water Act. But such a condition in those days, there was more working across the aisle, and Republicans and Democrats overrode the veto. So that was one thing I remember, that, wow, he goes through this exercise to create the EPA, which was a huge thing, and really help rivers and streams and lakes and oceans in this country. And then in 72, he vetoed the Clean Water Act. Well, a lot of people are still trying to understand Richard Nixon, but I like this photo. They're all younger then, and they got together on the EPA. This indicates the end of my presentation. I would mention, however, that I'm speaking several times during Yankee Homecoming. On Monday night, the 2nd, I will be at the Newburyport Library in the evening. Thursday, the 6th, I will be at the Custom House Maritime Museum speaking. And then Thursday, the 5th, I will be on Zoom with the adult education program. So it's on my website. It's dykehendrickson.com. I will be speaking about the river on those 3 days during Yankee Homecoming, early August. But I'll also be speaking about some of my research about Plum Island. And I've got to say, it's a really interesting story how Annie H. Brown was able to give hundreds of acres to the feds and to the Audubon Society. And those organizations had to fight off the sportsmen, the hunters and the fishermen, who said, wait a sec, we want to hunt here, we want to fish here, we want to bring our dogs, one of the little things. So there was really quite a dust up. This was 1942. And then in about the 50s and 60s, there had been a polio summer camp out there for polio patients. And that was a wonderful thing for this group of people. But that ended as soon as polio ended, and it was not opened again. So the polio camp left, and eventually all the houses have been taken down. So the story of Plum Island is very interesting. I look forward to talking about it with you. I always say, gosh, if I discovered something, it must be interesting. I mean, of course, some people know about all these things, but the whole history of the natural end, the federal wildlife preserve in the southern end, in recent years, the building on the northern end, there's been so much erosion. If you've been around here a few years, you know that houses and shacks actually fall into the ocean. This is true. And so there's a lot to talk about with Plum Island. And my next book is titled Plum Island, A Vulnerable Gem. So that's it for me. I'm Dyke Hendrickson. This is Joppa Radio 96.3 FM, Channel 9 on cable television. We're here every Tuesday from 2 to 2:30. Sometimes we have guests, sometimes I show slides, and sometimes, like today, I find someone like Annie H. Brown, who gave hundreds of acres to the wildlife preserve, and that's why we have a wonderful southern end of Plum Island. So that's it. I will get with you next week. Again, I'm speaking Monday at the library, Thursday on Zoom with adult education, and Friday in the evening, I will be at the Custom House Maritime Museum. I hope I see some of you there. Thank you for being with us. Good day.